Welcome to the Harvesting Wisdom podcast. Together we explore the vast landscapes of life, delving into the rich soil of experiences, sowing the seeds of curiosity, and harvesting the profound wisdom that each episode unfolds. Hello, and welcome again to another episode of Harvesting Wisdom. We're a podcast it's an environmental podcast that's about sustainability, climate smart agriculture, and telling the stories of individuals and organizations that are involved with science and sustainability. And my guest today is Dr. Donald McFarlane, and you're with Claremont McKenna.
Claremont McKenna College in California.
Yeah, and you are a biologist in your field and by training and education, and still very active.
I try.
Well, you've lived what I consider a very exciting life, and traveling all over the world and following your passion, and I don't know if you consider yourself what they call them, splunkers, the guys who go into caves.
Yeah, that would be the American term for it. Yes, a caving. So I began as a teenager as a caver or a spelunker, which is in the sporting aspects, and caves have been my passion since I was probably 13, 14 years old, and I've been fortunate enough to develop a career that involves things in caves, particularly bats and things associated with bats and extinct animals and so on.
And you have been all over the world. You were telling me you're in Borneo and Costa Rica and here and Jamaica, the West Indies, and now today we're on the National Geographic island or two here in the Galápagos in Ecuador. Have you been here before?
I have not been to the Galápagos before. I have been to Ecuador for some of the caves on the mainland of Ecuador in the past, but not out to the Galápagos. So this is a really exciting opportunity to see the classic wildlife.
Yeah. This is where a lot of observational science began back a couple hundred years ago, and great stories. How's your experience in your trip then?
It's been wonderful. I mean, it's tremendous to be able to see wildlife up close, which is what I think distinguishes the Galápagos from other destinations. There are many parts of the world you can go to and see amazing wildlife, but usually it's a fleeting glimpse, in the forest. Whereas here, of course, you can go right up to these animals.
You can get to big mammals in Africa. You can see quite a bit, but if you were to get out of that Land Cruiser, it would not be a good thing.
Exactly. You could see the elephants easily enough in East Africa, but you can't get close to them. Whereas here, we can be as close to animals as you and I are right now.
Yeah, this morning. Well, I'm not sure if you did the dive this morning or not, but I saw a sea lion. I saw a little shark. I saw schools of fish. When I looked up, I saw a lot of species on the cliffs, and it was just amazing. But the color is always what gets me, and it's an interesting place geographically too, because it's an archipelago. It's in the Caribbean. You'd think this would be warm water, and you'd have coral, but really it's just these volcanic rock with tremendous amount of algae and
relatively cold water compared
to
the Caribbean.
Chile in there, right? But still, the productivity is amazing, because the schools of fish, I let my imagination run wild. I was in this huge school of fish above me, below me, next to me, it was all around me, and I'm just thinking I'm one of the fish swimming by. But so,
of course, yesterday we had the opportunity to see a blue whale, which was just amazing.
How about that? Yeah, I've done whaling in New Zealand and the east coast of the U.S. and but never saw anything. Well, we were eating lunch back. Just looked over there. Hey, that's a blue whale. So it's been an amazing experience, and it's compact in such a short period of time. But, now, when your travels, you're going everywhere. You're going into caves. Have you ever had this kind of luxury before?
Not even close.
I mean, this isn't a bad way to go, though, huh?
I was commenting the first day it was a little bit unsettling because they take away your checked baggage at the airport and take care of it for you. Because normally you want keeping a very close eye on your bags.
Yeah, well, especially if you have equipment and gear.
Right, exactly.
Yeah.
And here they take your bag away and it shows up 12 hours later in your room or in your cabin here, but in between. Very bad.
So we do this podcast is an international podcast, and we have a fair amount of guests from Africa and Europe, and of course the U.S. I'm here. This isn't my first time into South America, but first time after we started podcasting, and I've had several of the national naturalists on board who are all marine biologists mostly and scientists in their own right, but very passionate people.
Very, very knowledgeable.
Yeah, and in the country, I didn't do a lot of research. You've been here before, but I haven't done a lot on Ecuador. There's so many places to go or whatever, but I find it kind of, refreshing after going to a lot of places that, with fairly high educational standard. The population earns technically about half of what the average person in the U.S. makes, but the cost of living is, less than half as well. So it's pretty good. Plus, every day you wake up, you've got all these different this area. All these places I go, I'm just blown away at the diversity in the geology, the geography, and the really different biomes. And I think that's kind of what probably threw Darwin off when he was here too. Just looking at one island over here versus one island here, and even though we're technically Ecuador is 600 miles away, we're out in the middle of the ocean, right?
And the key is this upwelling of nutrients that's really supporting this very rich marine ecosystem. Even a lot of the organisms that we've seen on land, like the blue-footed boobies and so on, they're of course feeding in this very rich marine ecosystem.
Yeah, and it's such a balanced ecosystem. And when I've talked to everyone here, they really haven't seen the effects of climate change, at least here in the Galápagos, because of the trade winds and because of that upwelling. And you gave a lecture, an excellent lecture yesterday on the formation of islands and the evolution of islands and how they all, how they form, how long they're here, and really interesting the extinction of species plus the new species. And again, it's still kind of balanced here, whereas I'm not so sure. Well, it's certainly you can see climate change when you go into the main Amazon and the other side of the country here. And one naturalist did tell me that the warm season has now gone from about 3 months to about 4. And we're so used to such dramatic climate change events that doesn't seem like a big deal, but it is a pretty big deal in one person's lifetime to see that kind of thing. What drove you into? I know you love the caves and you got in there, and I mean the cave dweller is the bat, right? But what drove you to biology to begin with, and into bats and that sort of thing?
To be honest, I've always been interested. As a very young child, in animals and fossils, and all those little kids that had the dinosaurs and all the rest, and that interest. So my interest in biology and paleontology goes back further than I can remember. And I just carried on doing the same stuff.
Yeah.
I've been fortunate, to be able to make a living out of it.
Yeah. Well, and yesterday I had asked you this question, I'll ask it again, but you actually identified a species by finding, I don't know if it was fossilized, it was just the...
Yeah, I mean, there's not really a formal distinction between fossilized and subfossil, but it's old stuff, in this case preserved in caves, because caves act as a shelter, as a natural museum, if you like. Bones and things accumulate in them, they get preserved from the elements and not breaking down. And so you can material of some of these West Indies caves that are only decades old, hundreds of years old, thousands of years old, and the oldest fossils coming out of there go back. The oldest fossils I've worked with, they never go back to the last interglacial period of 128,000 years ago.
And you found, so you found a species. Not too many people on the Earth can say they've done that. I think back in those 1800s, people were exploring the world, and they were like Darwin. He was with the taxidermy, and they were getting, and there was this explosion, this worldwide of people who had this
because a lot
for knowledge,
of it.
right?
I mean, this really obviously originated. This idea of going out and classifying animals and studying animals really originated in 17th century Europe, and back in the 1800s there were still a lot of areas of the world that had not been visited by European scientists, so there were lots of opportunities to be the first person there actually doing those kinds of collecting.
And it's
a little harder now in some areas. A little harder in if you're interested in new species of birds, you get maybe one new species a year being found. Mammals, maybe two.
Probably more with plants.
Especially insects. So most of the biodiversity on the planet is insects. So if you are a specialist in tropical rainforest insects, there's a lot. Yeah, that's a lot going on. And unfortunately, the rainforest is being removed faster than those species are being collected and described. So many of them will never be known because they're going to be gone before anyone actually collects them.
Yeah, it's going so fast, and I was reading about the in the Amazon. I'm not sure if it was here in Ecuador or in Peru. I think it was in Brazil, but where they have the basin of the Amazon, and then a 10,000 foot mountain right next to it, and it talks about almost every 1,000 feet or less, completely different zones of vegetation, the trees. I mean, just the obvious thing. And this is where migration is. The concept is so critical, because it talks about, the plants that were surviving on the bottom. That's heated up, so they go one layer up, one layer up, one layer up.
Yeah, the organisms, the lower elevations are probably okay, for the next few hundred years, because they're going to move up, but there's somewhere for them to move up to. But the ones that are currently at the top don't have anywhere to move up to.
Unless they are migrated through birds, but some of the problem isn't the extinction events, because that has always been going on, right? And the idea of the next ice age, or the next extinction isn't really the issue. The issue is the speed at which everything is going right now. It's accelerated by man at 10 times the rate. So what species of tree or plant or animal might survive through migration, they just don't have the time.
Exactly. I mean, the degree of climate change between, let's say, the last ice age 20,000 years ago and today is way bigger than any human-caused climate change that we're going to see in many centuries. But the difference, as you point out, is that it's not the magnitude of the change, it's the rate of
Sure.
which is
And
unprecedented.
we can also look at the last ice age, the last extinction. Right before it, the parts per million of CO2 was, I think it was 448 or something to that nature. And technically, we should be at 280, and we're already at 360 or something now, right?
Over 400.
Yeah, and it's getting to a point where, that's the cause and effect, so to speak. So we'll see what goes now in your specific research, because it'd be probably just as much fun to be a specialist as it would be to be a naturalist who is a generalist, right? The generalist gets to see everything, but the generalist relies on the specialist to do the real science, right? So you're really the science guy. You're the specialist when it comes to looking at really the way you're looking at it is through the guana, right? At what they're eating.
Depending on the project, but we've certainly in recent years been looking at climate and environmental records that are preserved in these deep deposits of bat guano, excrement that have accumulated in caves, and depending on whether it's a warm cave or a cold cave in other parts of the world, sometimes those deposits can be many thousands of years old. So there's a detailed isotopic record, for example, heavy metal records, and so on.
So I know we talked about, the East Coast, and now it's spreading to Europe as well. There's a few species of bats that are, quickly becoming extinct due to the
so we have this unfortunate fungal disease, white nose disease, it's called, because the fungus grows on the noses of hibernating bats in the cooler parts of the country.
So do you see that as being a function? I mean, that could be that. I think that was just a fungal disease that was probably spread, just like right now. I think
undoubtedly brought by humans, because one can do molecular testing of bats in Europe and show that same fungus is present, but it doesn't kill the bats there, because they've co-evolved with that fungus for a long period of time.
Sure.
So in North America, the disease appeared in a single abandoned mine in the state of New York, wiped out the population, and then spread throughout the Northeast. So it's almost certain that someone accidentally probably visited a cave or a mine in Europe, probably picked up some spores on their boots or something of this nature, and their hiking boots. A few weeks or months later, put those same hiking boots on and visited this mine in New York, and bang.
And that's, I remember as a kid having Dutch elm disease going through upstate New York, and now it's going through as another, I don't know the name of it, but it's the ash trees getting hit. And so some of these things aren't new, right?
Yeah.
And it's the same thing. So sometimes you have people who are climate deniers, which makes no sense. It's not a political issue, but and the reason is when they see there's so many species of everything, right, from microbes to arthropods, these insects. There's so many. They don't understand the real impact is the lessening of biodiversity, the reducing of it, right? So what's you've got different projects. They're all somewhat related to the study of bats. And why are bats important in their environment?
Well, amongst mammals, they're a very diverse group. Something like a quarter of all the species of mammals on Earth are bats. So that in itself is interesting, and they have an enormous range of ecologies, from feeding on insects to plants to nectar, even fish, blood in the case of vampire bats, and so on. So it's a very, they're pretty much everywhere in the nocturnal ecosystem, especially in the tropics where the diversity is maximum. So it's hard to be interested in the ecology of a tropical forest without taking into account bats at some point.
Sure. Yeah, they're responsible for a lot of the movement of seed and
Pollination, seed distribution,
pollination and everything. So, what would you say if you were to sum up all of the studies you've had and your experience now traveling the world? What would you say the overall direction for research should be when it comes to studying the bats?
Well, I think you have to take that also in the context of developing technologies, because new technologies provide all kinds of new opportunities. So with DNA analysis and so on, we're now having the opportunity to separate cryptic species where animals look, in the hand they look to be the same and they're assumed to be one species, and when you look at DNA they're actually two completely different species. And doing different things, of course. So that's important. That's going to be increasingly important in recent years. There are also lots of new technologies for other things that in the past are very difficult. Looking at there's a development of audio recording of bats. There's reasonably inexpensive audio recorders that specifically tune to ultrasonic frequencies, and you can plant these in the forest or set them out, and they will record bat sounds, and those bat echolocation sounds are specific to different species.
Very similar to a lot of birders doing the same thing.
And also frogs, yeah. The bat calls are more complicated than birds or frogs, because birds and frogs are calling just to attract mates of their own species. So it's kind of like any particular species of bird or frog has one call to attract the females. With bats, they're using ultrasound to look for food, to avoid flying into trees, and so on. And so they're using different sounds for different things.
Because they're flying at night. So
right. So coming out of a cave or flying through a forest, they're using one set of ultrasound calls to avoid flying into things.
Almost like dolphins.
Yeah, exactly the same. But then when they're trying to capture an insect in the air, they're changing to a different set of ultrasounds, because the target is quite different. A small moving insect is different from a tree. So the result is these recordings have a lot more complexity, these different calls and so on. So it's more technical to extract information.
So it still comes down to a lot of data collection and inventory, and the advantage, like you said, is the tools today. DNA was considered, I guess, in the last 50 years the most important thing in science, because it changed science completely.
Exactly.
Right?
Yeah.
But now we're in the advent of supercomputers too, so the ability to record all those signs and to record that DNA is there.
Yes, I think because one of the bottlenecks is you can put these recorders out for all night for a month. You might have 50 recorders scattered through the forest, different areas, and they're all recording 12 hours a night for a month. That's a tremendous amount of data that would take a huge amount of time to go through manually. So I think
there's only so many undergraduates.
Exactly.
You just need one who knows how to run
and go away.
Computer, right?
You have to wait till the next load of freshmen come in.
Right.
But yeah, so there's obviously a great potential there for AI, broadly speaking, to go through those huge data sets and pull out what they need to know.
It's still exciting. If in fact maybe more exciting. The only question is, as we learn and learn more, will it be a little depressing?
Yeah. Or too late.
Or too late to do much about it. Right? So, well, I appreciate the fact we're recording here in the science. What do they call this? The science lab, the science hub of the National Geographic, which is a very different concept too. The idea of conservation. Conservation really is a broad term where we want just everyone to be conservationists, right? Everybody on the planet. And so not everyone can change careers and become a scientist, and or be involved necessarily with agriculture or be involved with decoding DNA or any of those things, but everyone can be aware of their world and their planet.
And there are roles for people to participate, many diverse roles.
Sure. And just the idea of coming here and gaining an appreciation for it, very similar to me, going back and forth to Africa. And you were up in Africa in caves and areas that most people wouldn't go to, but off of Kenya, looking at the same stuff. But still, the idea of there's similarities. That's the thing about traveling and going to these places. To me, there's a lot of similarities, and then there's a tremendous amount of differences, right? A tremendous amount of diversity. But the world is a system, right? And each area we go, each thing we look at, there's very small microsystems, ecosystems, and up in the Andes, for instance, there's just really small geographic areas that are very distinct, but they all are part of this whole.
Even here in the Galápagos, where the mountains are a lot shorter, but even so, very distinct ecosystems that we've seen on the tops of some of these mountains from lower down.
And even the water, going down 10,000 feet in different layers of water, and they're not exact layers, they move, and there's fluidity to it all. So it's an amazing world, and I think that is part of the exciting part. And hopefully it's we build with our nonprofit, we build STEM gardens, STEAM gardens now. And the idea is, I think, to just build curiosity in young people, so that they can follow a passion. There's room for that digital universe, of course. They're living it. I think people in their teenage years now are living in a different world than when I was a teenager, for sure. But the idea of being able to apply some of that new AI or some of the new softwares that are out there and hardwares that are doing so much more is great. But still, you got to still get outside and put your boots on and check out the real world. So, and this is a great way of doing it, especially for people who are maybe they're used to working a 9-to-5 desk job or working. Most people now are living in an urban environment, so they're not able to come out to the world. And this is kind of shock. There's a shock value in this, right? Because we're all used to being in an urban area. In the world now, it's more than 80% of humans live in urban areas. When you come out here, it's just wide open. It's just a big, beautiful ocean with some volcanoes that popped out, and it's been fun. Some of the lectures we've seen on board, obviously, there's things you've read about and I've read about, and they mentioned Wallace today, who was as important, if not, as Darwin was, and that was a different volcano that he was in over Krakatoa and Matterhorn and Jakarta. But it's interesting, and that's the whole concept of science. Is there's a lot of contributors to it, right? And so you got to do a lot of reading and a lot of traveling and a lot of things. But hopefully, and it's what I've noticed is that when we talk about harvesting wisdom, that's what I get to talk to people that normally wouldn't talk to me. And they do. And the idea is, with a lot of the scientists I'm dealing with, they're already. Sure.
Yeah. I'm sorry to
A lot of these scientists are now in their mid to late 70s, and I know a lot of them have like what they call the golden keys to the university, because there just isn't a lot of people coming behind, you know, and especially in seed science and soil science and that kind of thing. So,
and especially things that some areas in the animal equivalent, systematics, you know, the study of essentially identifying and naming and classifying new species, many invertebrate groups. You know, there were only ever one or two specialists in the world, and as you say, many of those have reached retirement age and beyond and haven't been replaced. So there are whole groups of invertebrates where there is no current specialist in that group.
The good news is that those people don't want to stop, and that is their life. It's not a matter of retiring. Why would you want to stop the one thing you're really good at and that you enjoy, right?
Exactly.
So that is the good thing. But the idea now for what we're doing is to just encourage that curiosity factor, and that's, you know, one of the reasons we, you know, operate, you know, wherever we're going in communities in that preschool all the way to high school level, which is harder to talk to kids for me, but fortunately there's a lot of people in my organization that's what they do. So, but I appreciate your time.
You're very welcome.
Thanks for taking the time here, and I'm glad you were on the ship because you added to
I'm glad you were here too.
the education to
It's
it.
been nice talking to you.
All right, appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you. Take care. Thank you for joining the Harvesting Wisdom podcast. Click subscribe and like for ongoing insightful conversations. Explore our webpage for show notes and additional resources. Visit our guests' webpage for deeper insights. Your engagement is the foundation of our journey, and until next time, keep pursuing wisdom.